Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rene Rodriguez. I'm a reporter with the Miami Herald, and we're here today for the virtual book launch of the Grifters Club, Trump, Mar-a-Lago, and the Selling of the Presidency, which is a new book written by four of my Herald colleagues. We're going to be talking to them about the writing of the book and some of what it's about. For those of us who live in South Florida, Mar-a-Lago has always been kind of like what Xanadu was in Citizen Kane, which is this kind of mythical palace most of us have not even seen, and we'll probably never get to see because we're not rich enough to set foot inside there. But we've always been aware of it, first as a country club in the early 2000s to the mid 2010s, and more recently as a Southern White House. Once President Donald Trump took office, he decided to make Mar-a-Lago his primary residence, and he often has referred to it as a Southern White House and has conducted national and international meetings and business there. What this book does is it kind of takes us beyond those gates with a degree that I think everyone will find incredibly surprising. It's a very funny and lively book. It's full of some juicy stories and also a couple of eyebrow-raising, shocking revelations. So I can't wait for the film adaptation, but today we're going to talk to two of its four authors. First up is Sarah Blasky. Sarah Blasky is an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald. She was a finalist for the Livingston for Young Journalists Award, and she's a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism. She's been at the Herald for 2.5 years, and in those 2.5 years, she's gone from someone who used to sit on the city desk writing to a top investigative reporter and just one of our strongest guns. So thanks for being here, Sarah.
Thanks, Renee. I liked the city desk. I missed that desk.
I bet. Next, we have Jay Weaver. Jay Weaver has been at the Herald for 21 years. He's the federal courts reporter and also an investigative journalist. He studied at Berkeley, and he is a fixture in the newsroom. Whenever anyone has a question about something complicated or some legal document that seems impenetrable, you go to Jay, and Jay translates it for you. So, Jay, thanks for being here, man.
You're welcome.
Another of the book's authors, Nicholas Nehamas, is in New Jersey. He's getting pummeled by Hurricane Isaias, so he's temporarily lost power. Hopefully, he will rejoin us before the hour is up. But Nicholas was a Pulitzer Prize winner for the Panama Papers package. He was also a Pulitzer finalist for the Dirty Gold series, and he studied at Columbia University for 6 years. And the fourth author of the book, Caitlin Ostroff, no longer works at the Herald. She got a job in London covering markets for the Wall Street Journal, but she was a big contributor to the book as well. So thanks, guys. Let's start with the actual conception of the book. We had been writing a series of stories for those of us for people who don't know the Herald. We have been writing a series of stories about Cindy Yang and that story that started to grow into something bigger and bigger and bigger regarding Mar-a-Lago. At what point did the book option become in?
Well, it's an interesting backstory because Nick and I and our colleagues Jim Wiss and Kira Gurney were writing a story about gold smuggling from South America to Miami, Miami being this hub for gold imports. And it was a multi-billion-dollar money laundering series that we published in 2018. And what happened is that the editors at Public Affairs were so intrigued by that series that they engaged us to do a book about dirty gold. And, it brought in everything. It brought in everything about the rainforest in Peru to drug traffickers, to cocaine investors, to money launderers, to these Miami gold importers. And they thought, wow, this is great. Let's see if you can do a book about it. Well, we did do a book. We did a rough draft, and they were so impressed with it as they began to read Sarah and Nick and Caitlin's coverage of Mar-a-Lago and Cindy Yang, this Asian Chinese American investor and entrepreneur, and her ties to Mar-a-Lago. They began to think, well, maybe there's a book about all these unusual people showing up at the president's, Southern White House. And so they engaged us to do a treatment and to propose a book on Trump and Mar-a-Lago. And Dirty Gold, while it was well underway and pretty much written, although it hadn't gone through edits, was put on the back burner. And because of the election coming up on November 3rd, at the time, the timetable was 1 year. So they said, let's do it. And Sarah took the lead, and the rest is history.
Hey, Renee, can I jump in here? Because I think that seems like a really random way to end up with a book, and it is. But as I look back on the process, I kind of think that's perfect, because almost everything that happens in and around Mar-a-Lago is a little bit random. It's almost like this larger than life, you couldn't make it up if you tried kind of situation. And so as we're, looking into Robert Kraft is charged with soliciting prostitution at a South Florida massage parlor. We're digging into that, and suddenly we find the former owner of that has taken a selfie with the president. And that's weird and random enough, but it's on the night that she's watching the Super Bowl, watching Robert Kraft's team win the Super Bowl with Donald Trump in Florida. And then it sort of goes on from there. It turns out this woman has nothing to do with that spa anymore. It's just sort of one of those random occurrences. And then that she has actually gotten out of the spa business, and her new business is selling access to the president, basically a company that says, pay us tens of thousands of dollars and we'll help you get a selfie with the US president. And so we start reporting on that. And as that sort of plays out, as Jay said, simultaneously they're working with public affairs, an imprint of Hachette Book Group, and the editors reached out to us and said, this seems pretty crazy. Do you think that there are more things like this at Mar-a-Lago? And we said, yeah, probably. And they said, could you write a book about it? And we said, yeah, we can try. And so that's where the Grifters Club sort of started.
Trump, of course, came from the world of real estate, and I think the way that he bought Mar-a-Lago is fascinating. It had been on the market for a few years, and I think the asking price was somewhere around $24 million for the entire estate. He made an initial offer in 1989 of $9 million, and his offer was rejected. And he later bought it at a bargain price, $5 million for the property, $3 million for all its furnishings, and another $2 million for the beachfront estate. Sarah, you said that this is probably the best deal Donald Trump ever made as a real estate developer.
I don't think anyone disputes that. It's an incredible deal. He basically bought one of the most iconic properties in the United States of this sort of jazz age, long lost age of the American aristocracy. He bought a relic of that age for a third of the asking price, basically by sitting and waiting until the sellers were desperate enough to sell it. And, he talks about it in The Art of the Deal. He talks about it all the time. And I think it's really undisputable that it is the best deal Donald Trump has ever made.
Palm Beach, however, was not happy to have him initially. Palm Beach is a very cloistered society, obviously very, very wealthy. Very insulated, and Trump represented a different kind of millionaire or billionaire to them. He was not someone who, necessarily follows proper etiquette. He was younger than a lot of them, I think, and he also already had an air of controversy around him. So when he first bought there and moved and relocated there, he wasn't welcomed with open arms.
No, Palm Beachers hated Donald Trump. He was everything that Palm Beach wasn't. He was new money. They were old money. He was flashy and wanted the press everywhere. They literally have these huge hedges in Palm Beach where, you can't see into anyone's yard. You don't know who owns that property. And that's intentional so that the press, the media stays away. That's old wealth. That's, this society that's untouchable for most of us. And Donald Trump used to call tabloids in to Mar-a-Lago when he first bought the estate and, give them interviews on things like Jennifer Lopez's butt. and things like that. And that was mortifying to Palm Beachers. In Palm Beach, you couldn't even jog. A male couldn't jog without a shirt on until the mid 90s. That was banned by the town of Palm Beach. We're talking about a very conservative, a very, isolated community of the ultra wealthy and the old money in the US. And Donald Trump was none of that. But the thing he was fun. And so, think what you will of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump made Palm Beach so much more fun than it was prior to him being there. And so he ended up kind of buying his way into the society by buying an iconic property that they all cared about, and then throwing really fun parties with like cheerleaders and stuff there that were way better than some of the stuffy parties that Palm Beachers were used to. And so in that way, Donald Trump sort of cornered part of this market in Palm Beach. And, again, kind of one of the best business deals he ever did.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to add, Renee, just real quickly, is that in the same way that Trump, coming from Queens, coming from a wealthy family in the apartment development business run by his father, Fred, sort of, assaulted New York, built Trump Tower, took it by storm, and insulted a lot of locals in the establishment in New York. He did the same thing in Palm Beach. The difference is that it was more about society, and he ended up turning these, Palm Beach swells, on their heads, and he basically rubbed everything he could in their faces, and it was very effective. I mean, they turned him down over and over again. He wanted to subdivide the property into, smaller estates, and they refused to let him do it. And a private attorney recommended that he turn it into a private club, and it became a kind of idea that he didn't like at first, but then it turned out to be a great idea. And it allowed him to sweep in and, kind of rebrand, Mar-a-Lago in his name. And it was a lot of fun, and it was very antisocial as far as Palm Beach goes, but it was as society was changing. And society was becoming more about names, celebrities, the very thing that Trump thrives on. And so Palm Beach was still staid and stodgy and kind of got left in the dust. And this is why Trump prevailed.
And initially, it was kind of like an open door policy. If you could afford it, you could become a member. Like, correct me if I'm wrong on this. But I believe the initial memberships were priced at around $50,000. So if you could pay for your membership, you were in. And it also became a place where celebrities love to come. There's a passage in the book where you talk about a New Year's Eve party where it was Billy Joel and Russell Simmons, and you have all these celebrities, Jack Nicholson, all these celebrities coming down to Mar-a-Lago because Trump at this point was, even though he was a businessman, he was also a celebrity. He was just as famous for his paparazzi stuff as he was for his business. So the club turns out to be a great idea, and he finds that there are takers, that there are a lot of people who are willing to pay this money, not necessarily to be near him, but to partake of the club. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, now people might become members of Mar-a-Lago because they want to get near the president. But before, people joined Mar-a-Lago for lots of different reasons. A lot of those celebrities that you mentioned aren't members of the club. They were just people that Donald Trump invited to various parties. And for obvious reasons, having celebrities at your parties makes your parties more popular. So there was sort of a benefit to both sides there. But back in the day, other Palm Beach clubs, these country clubs, did not allow Blacks, Jews, for the most part, people that were from new money. And so Donald Trump saw all of these people that had been left out from Palm Beach society who wanted a country club to participate in. And he said, oh, there are all of these people that will pay to be here. And he was right. People wanted a place to go, and Mar-a-Lago became that place for people that didn't have other country clubs to go to because of the exclusivity, the racism, and other things that were, sort of baked into Palm Beach society.
And the book makes the argument that Trump himself, you quoted Fred Weinberg, who's a music composer, and this is before he turned Mar-a-Lago into a club. he was working with Fred Weinberg to do recording music for a commercial for one of Atlantic City casinos. And Weinberg told you guys that Trump walked in and saw that all the musicians were black and used a derogatory slur to refer to them, saying, "I don't want them on my project." And then he asked Weinberg where he was from because he detected a strange accent, and he called him several anti-Semitic slurs, right to his face. But once Mar-a-Lago comes up, and again, he needs to get past those prejudices. All of a sudden, those things are not an issue for him.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see Donald Trump and the way that looking into Mar-a-Lago has helped me understand Donald Trump as a person is you might think he is just sort of a walking contradiction, right? For example, he's racist in New York, but he's not racist in Palm Beach. He doesn't want black people anywhere near his business in New York, but in Palm Beach, it's the more the merrier, everyone's welcome. Did he just have some kind of crazy change of heart, or what happened there? And another example I look to of the walking contradiction is Donald Trump is a known germaphobe. He won't even share the same butter dish as other people at his table at Mar-a-Lago, like even his wife, because he is such a germaphobe. But recently we've seen months into a global pandemic, he, doesn't wear a mask around other people, that kind of thing. Like, that seems like a contradiction. But when you look at Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, you realize his sort of core being, who he is inherently, is he is the ultimate party host. He is the ultimate maitre d'. And so if you think, maybe personally he's kind of grossed out by germs, but if his party guest needs something, yeah, he'll stand in line at the buffet and, yuck it up with people. And it makes him very endearing. So even though he probably wouldn't normally touch the burger that everyone else has touched, he will in that moment because it helps him be that party host. And I think the same is true with race and racism, right? In Palm Beach, the way he sold memberships at Mar-a-Lago was to appeal to people that had otherwise been shut out. And so, I think it's helpful to see him in that lens as someone that's trying to please his guests, or someone that's trying to, be the ultimate maitre d'.
And you see that. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna add, though, is that you see these contradictions, but Trump is the consummate opportunist, and so I think he exploited, and I'm sure Sarah knows this and agrees with me, that he exploited these relationships not only to sell memberships, but to rub all of this in high society's face in Palm Beach County while he could promote his own brand. And his personality will light up, and he will become a very personable man and very friendly to people if it can lead to a business opportunity or a way to promote his family name or their connections or bring in more money. I mean, everything is toward that end. That's his ideology, money. And all of this serves that purpose. And there's no surprise there. It's in his resume since he was a kid. And this is the way he operates. But this also explains the contradictions.
And what you're saying plays in, there's a passage in the book where you guys write about, I believe it was a fundraiser that he attended at Boca Raton, where he had just started entertaining. He had talked about running for president for years before that. At one point, he was going to run as a Democrat. At one point, he was going to run as an independent. But you guys write in the book about this one particular event that he attends in Boca Raton, and he starts. It's the same thing that we see now in his Trump rallies. The crowd is going crazy for him. He starts feeding off that energy. His speech runs on for like 45 minutes. It was only supposed to be 20 minutes. And right at that moment, you almost get a crystallization where that may have been one of the moments where Trump said, you know what, I am really going to run for office, because it made him feel great, that Boca Raton event.
Yeah, so that was a tax day event, and it was hosted by a local chapter of the Tea Party. And actually, one of the most interesting things is the organizers who we spoke to, who actually organized that event, initially were kind of freaked out by Donald Trump being the keynote speaker. They had no idea what his politics were. They, thought, I don't think this is really going to jive with our, goals here. And ultimately they were talked into it because Donald Trump can draw a crowd, and that's what they needed. And so they expected, 500, 600, maybe 1,000 people to show up at this rally, but they had billed it as come see Donald Trump tell Congress you're fired. Donald Trump shows up 5 minutes before his speech. He's there with an old friend who had sort of hooked him up with the Tea Party, Guido Lombardi, who is a sort of part-time political fixer. He's Italian, connected to the far-right party there. And he brings Donald Trump, his friend, and says, hey, come up here, give a speech. Gets there 5 minutes before the event, gets on stage, makes a couple of self-deprecating jokes about his hair and the wind, and then sort of just starts talking. And it was that freewheeling thing. And every time the crowd reacted to something, he went back to it. So one of those things was China. But then at one point, he says, what do you guys want me to talk about? And the crowd starts shouting things like George Soros and stuff like that. And so he just spitballs on all of these things. And the thousands of people that showed up that day loved it. And the Tea Party organizers were like, phew, dodged a bullet there. He was great. They liked him. He was more of a patriot than they expected him to be. And as he's walking out, he's talking to his friend Guido. And, Guido says, Donald, do you like this? And Donald Trump says, yeah. And Guido says, I know the feeling. It's better than sex. And that is ultimately, I think, the moment that Donald Trump became a actual viable political candidate and the only person mind who matters to Donald Trump, which is his own. And that was when he started really considering it. And, that's 2011. And then fast forward to 2015 when he, comes out and makes the announcement that he's going to run on the Republican ticket for president.
So the greatest upset in presidential election history, in a way, was born at Mar-a-Lago. You could say that the germs of it were planted there. I'm glad to see Nick Hamas has been able to join us from Jersey. Hi, Nick. I told everyone where you were, but happy that you were able to join us.
Yeah, the power came back on. I'm glad to be here.
Good. So he's elected president. He goes back to Mar-a-Lago, and things immediately start to change, right? People started coming to Mar-a-Lago to hit him up for a job. You write in the book that Fabio, the model, approached him as a possible position in his administration. Sylvester Stallone presents him with this signed poster celebrating his presidential victory. Trump offers him a job at the Arts Council, some kind of position having to do with arts in the administration. In other words, he's basically just offering all these people that he knows, he's trying to pair them up with jobs that might fit them. But a lot of this is being done in Mar-a-Lago. It's not done in the traditional power corridors of the White House. And one of the points that the book makes is that as this went on and as his presidency has gone on, people who are in DC aren't really as privy or as close or as involved with the Trump presidency as his gang in Mar-a-Lago, his friends, his personal friends, his old-timer friends. And he's had, presidents from other countries come and visit there instead of the White House. Nick, can you talk a little bit about that, about how Mar-a-Lago shifted from that country club thing to gradually becoming a kind of political powerhouse place for Trump, who christened it the Southern White House and eventually made his main residence there?
Yeah, I mean, it became a shadow cabinet of sorts because, people knew that the place to get the president alone and really bend his ear, is not the White House. It is Mar-a-Lago. And, the DC insiders, the GOP establishment started 10 miles behind in this race to whisper in the president's ear. They didn't know, as Sarah was saying about, Guido Lombardi, that the best way to get the president's attention isn't, necessarily to approach him directly, but to intrigue him with something and, make him come to you a little bit. I don't know if we've talked about David Shulkin already, who was the Veterans Affairs Secretary for some time, but he was, actually in the Obama administration, and he found himself answering to what, the VA staff termed the Mar-a-Lago crowd, a group of three men who met at Mar-a-Lago and kind of pulled a lot of the strings at the VA. There's one instance where Shulkin was just so totally out of the loop that he and Trump were on a live TV appearance, and Trump turned to, his own VA secretary and said, we're having this roundtable at Mar-a-Lago tonight to discuss veterans issues. You're coming, right, David? And Shulkin kind of smiled and, looked taken aback and said nothing. And in fact, it turned out that he had no idea that there was this Mar-a-Lago gathering. He was in DC, and that's not where the center of power is in this administration.
The first big, which you write about in the book, but the first big political event that I remember in Mar-a-Lago was when he hosted the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And I remember that made a lot of news because he was doing it at Mar-a-Lago. There were a lot of photo ops. There was that infamous handshake thing that stretched on uncomfortably long. But I remember that to me was the first one where I was like, oh wow, like it's kind of unusual that a president would take a visiting dignitary to his winter home, like winter retreat. But I feel that was the first one, correct?
That was the first one. And it's funny listening to the staff talk about this. Normally these bilateral summits happen in the White House. They're handled by White House staff who are extremely experienced in how diplomacy actually happens and unfolds, the nitty-gritty of it. Well, this time Donald Trump says, no, I'm going to host the Japanese Prime Minister at Mar-a-Lago. And suddenly it's his staff at his club who are tasked with putting together this international summit 3 weeks into the Trump presidency. And so there are all kinds of funny stories from staffers, sort of running around trying to figure out, what do you even feed the Japanese prime minister? Like, what is appropriate to put on the menu? How do we deal with this? And it just sort of illustrates how underprepared people were for this to be the White House, right? Effectively, Mar-a-Lago has become the president's home, or at least one of the two president's home that's used in a way that the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue is traditionally used for, to bring dignitaries to have these meetings and to start, push forward international diplomacy. And suddenly it's this crew of Mar-a-Lago staff helping to make that happen. And the stories that they tell are wild. I don't want to go into it now or spoil the book, but you can't make this stuff up, as Carl Hyacin says.
Well, and for this particular meal, like once they figure out, because Shinzo said, no, like I want to eat what you guys would normally eat. And I think it was a week before the event, they got cited for all kinds of health violations. So they had to actually get rid of all the food that they had in there, but they pulled it off. We talked about this a little bit earlier today, but I feel like the secret heroes or the secret weapons of this book are the Mar-a-Lago staffers who spoke. Some of them, I don't know how you got them to speak, but they are there, they're boots on the ground, and they witness these things with a intimacy that others don't. And one of my favorite anecdotes in the book is this is before he became president. And Donald Trump is sitting out. It's the morning, and he's sitting out looking over his tennis courts. And one of the staffers asks him, "Do you want some water?" And Donald Trump snaps at him and says, "No." And the staffer watches him. He's just sitting there looking at the courts, and he says, "These are the greatest courts in the world." And he's not speaking to anyone. He's alone. So it's almost like he's thinking out loud. And I feel like that little anecdote gives us so much insight into Trump's what's often called his narcissism or his need to be like the best, number one. He's looking at these tennis courts that he owns, and he's boasting to nobody they are the greatest tennis courts in the world. And from that, I think you can extrapolate a lot of what makes Donald Trump tick.
Nick, I'm going to let you take this.
Yeah, Nick. I'm sorry, Nick. I meant to throw to you. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. So, the greatest salesman tend to believe their own pitches, right? And Trump really believes that, Mar-a-Lago is the greatest place in the world. It's certainly one of his best real estate deals. And, that kind of interior monologue that was overheard and included in our book is very much how he talks about the club. I mean, he tweets about it. The State Department wrote a post, on an official government website about what a great place it was. And, Trump really, really loves Mar-a-Lago. It is, I think Jay described it, as his man cave yesterday. And he wants the world to know it. And it doesn't hurt that it pads his bottom line, the more, highly people think of it.
One of the other anecdotes in the book is that at the final dinner of one of the seasons, Donald was not happy with the shrimp that was served. And this is mentioned repeatedly in the book, that he has an amazing memory. I mean, he can remember like the tiniest details. So 6 months later, when Mar-a-Lago reopens, the first thing he asks the chef is, did you fix the shrimp situation? So he has an amazing memory, and yet somehow he claims to not remember that Jeffrey Epstein was a member of Mar-a-Lago. What do you think about that disparity of recollection ability?
Well, I think it's what Jay said earlier, right? I think when he doesn't remember Jeffrey Epstein being a member, it's not so much a reflection of his memory as it is him being the business person that is maintaining his brand, which is what Donald Trump will always do, is maintain his brand. And so, there isn't a single person that we talk to, staff, member, friend, who said that Donald Trump has a bad memory. Everyone said it's scary what he remembers. He'll remember that your aunt's sister had surgery and ask about it. And that's because Donald Trump cares deeply about the details that make his club worth going to in his mind. Here's an example of the opposite of that. So Donald Trump walks into his grand ballroom on Mar-a-Lago property, and this is the only building on the property of any consequence that Donald Trump actually constructed himself. And he walks in and he looks around, it looks great. It's got these mirrored walls, these crazy chandeliers, crystal, and he looks at the ceiling and says, "No, it's not shiny enough." And it turns out that it's not shiny enough because, unlike the rest of the property, it's molding, the crown molding is not actually real gold. It's just gold paint. And he says, no, redo it with gold leaf. So he notices that level of detail, but at the same time doesn't realize that his mirrored walls echo sound so badly that when a singer is in there performing and anyone even whispers at a table next to you, you can't hear yourself think. It is painfully noisy. The acoustics in that room are terrible. And it's not that he doesn't have attention to detail. It's that he has attention to the details that he cares about.
And Sarah and I experienced that firsthand. We actually went to a charity event at Mar-a-Lago, which was just a fascinating experience. And in the grand ballroom, when the Italian opera singer was blasting, it was very difficult to have a conversation. But people accepted it for what it was. They were at the President's Club. Some of them had traveled a long way. It was one of the more affordable events, so they felt like they had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they weren't going to complain about the acoustics. They were having the time of their lives.
Speaking of singers, there's a great anecdote in the book, which also takes place during Shinzo Abe's visit summit. It's the second night, and there's a wedding reception going on in another part of the estate. And Don Basham, who is one of Trump's favorite lounge singers, was performing for the president and his guests. I'm going to read just this one paragraph from the book because I think it's perfect. Intent on showing off to Abe, Trump sent his aides to bring Basham right up to their table. This happens a lot to performers at Mar-a-Lago. They are asked to stand next to the table and sing his requests, usually something from Phantom of the Opera or Cats. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've ever heard about Trump's musical preferences. And I don't know what to make of the fact that he really likes the soundtracks of two plays that are considered to be kind of tourist trappy, Bridge and Tunnel. Like, what did you guys make of this? Were you surprised by his choice?
Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Sarah, we can't hear you, Sarah.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Awesome. Yeah, doing these from home is always a joy. So I think it makes total sense. Donald Trump, at the end of the day, is a kid from Queens who grew up, looking across the river at Manhattan. And those are the types of plays that would appeal to him. And he is, as he is requesting these things at Mar-a-Lago in that moment, and this is a spoiler, so if you haven't read the book or the Herald excerpt, maybe cover your ears for a second. But he has this lounge singer who's incredibly beautiful over there. She's singing his favorite songs, and he asks her to twirl around and sort of show off for the Prime Minister of Japan, when suddenly a phone call comes in. And on that phone call, it turns out that North Korea has shot a nuclear missile in the direction of Japan. And, we talked to someone who witnessed this exchange, who sort of overheard what happened. And it turns out the lounge singer sort of stops and says, "Mr. President, I probably shouldn't know this." And he is so caught up in the moment and these things that he wants to show off that he says, no, it's just nukes. Sing us a song. And obviously that isn't what happened. She quickly clears out. All the aides run in. They're, looking at all of the documents, and life moves on. But it's just sort of illustrative of the tensions that exist at Mar-a-Lago, which on the one hand is a club made for entertainment, made for people's enjoyment. And on the other hand, serves as, the home of the President of the United States. And that gives us real questions about national security and how that works at the club.
And after he left the party and had held a press conference with the Prime Minister of Japan, he went back to the wedding reception and offered bride and groom a very jovial toast. So, like, even though North Korea has just launched a nuclear missile towards Japan, he's like, okay, but I'm still going to go do this toast, which again, I think speaks to his personality and helps you understand him maybe a little bit better in terms of, as you were saying, he's like the ultimate maitre d', the ultimate host, and he loves to please.
But one thing I wanted to throw out for my colleagues is a repeating theme in the book, and that's the whole idea of Trump being the king of the kingdom. At the White House, he's the president, but he's taking slings and arrows all the time. At Mar-a-Lago, he is the king. Nobody questions his viewpoint. Everybody is at his beck and call. People are friendly to him. I mean, there are sycophants, there are obsequious creatures surrounding him, and everything goes his way. And so it's his natural habitat. And, I would love to hear from Nick or Sarah about that in terms of how that plays out. It's not just about the money and the ego, but he really likes to be the king.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. He calls all the shots at Mar-a-Lago in a way that, he can't anywhere else. In Washington, D.C., he's got Congress, he's got the press, but at Mar-a-Lago, unlike other clubs in Palm Beach, there's not even a board to act as the gatekeepers of polite society. At Mar-a-Lago, everything, from the shrimp to the ovens to the tennis courts, comes down to the taste of Donald Trump. Although, as we've said, he is, most interested in catering to the tastes of his members.
One consequence, of course, of having a Southern White House is that the line begins to blur between what Trump needs to pay on his own and where he can earn money and where tax dollars go. And you guys devote a chapter to this. Michael Dobbs is a director of an obscure government office tasked with managing logistics for presidential travel. And the creative expense reports that start flooding into his office not only generate a huge headache, but it also points to the fact that Trump may be making money on profits on properties such like this, even though they're staffing the security, all the security service, all the travel arrangements are paid by taxpayers. So there seems to be an enormous conflict of interest there. Can you guys talk a little bit about that, especially now that he's under investigation by New York for, we don't know exactly yet, but one of the charges might be something like misrepresentation of the values of his properties and his businesses. Jay, you want to take that?
Well, I would defer to Sarah. I mean, because this is really more her area. But I'll just say that there had been some prior reporting on this in the news media, and it really didn't even scratch the surface. It's remarkable to me how much the Mar-a-Lago staff and Trump, through these state visits, through these dignitaries, through these weekend visits, was able to run up this tab, millions and millions and millions of dollars, and just get away with it because Trump would say, and his staff would say, what are you going to do about it? I mean, sue me, the way that he always kind of talks. And he just always seemed to get his way about these outrageous expenses where there clearly was a conflict of interest because he capitalized on the brand of Mar-a-Lago, the brand of his name, the brand of his business. Everything was coursing through that club, and he was making money coming and going, notwithstanding some negative publicity along the way. And I think Sarah can talk about that a little bit more in detail.
No, I think you said it right, Jay. I mean, what I would add is, in certain respects, the presidency has not been profitable for at least Mar-a-Lago, but larger elements of the Trump organization as well, especially after Charlottesville and the comments that the president made. This is a neo-Nazi rally where a counter protester was killed, and Donald Trump sort of nods to both sides and says that there are good people on both sides. And that overnight lost about 2/3 of the big gala business that happens at Mar-a-Lago. So a large part of the revenue that comes in each year are these charity events, these Saturday night galas. And overnight, they disappear after those comments. And so the presidency from that perspective has not been incredibly profitable for Mar-a-Lago. However, there are these new revenue streams now that Donald Trump is president. Some are, sort of off the cuff galas that are thrown by his supporters, but another large revenue stream is money that comes in from the U.S. government. And it comes in because every time Secret Service comes to Mar-a-Lago and needs to protect the president or his family, they have to rent rooms. They have to rent a place for them to set up, all of their equipment. Every time Stephen Bannon went to Mar-a-Lago with the president early on, he rented a room, and the U.S. taxpayers paid that price. And we don't know how much U.S. taxpayer dollar have gone into Mar-a-Lago. We don't know how many, because those receipts have not been entirely disclosed. But as Jay pointed out, the Washington Post, ProPublica, Public Citizen, and several other entities have sued to make some of those receipts available. And we were able to go through all of them that have been made public and sort of do a comprehensive look at how much money is being spent in these tiny windows of time where we do have the information. And, across the Trump organization, for just a couple of months of time, you're looking at almost $1 million. So there are clauses in the U.S. Constitution that prohibit a sitting president from making money or profiting, rather, from the U.S. federal government or state governments or a foreign government. And, Donald Trump has been sued several times over these clauses called the emoluments clauses for potential violations at his club. And those are still ongoing. We don't know how they're going to resolve.
You guys give several examples in the book of grifters, or the kind of people that became grifters at Mar-a-Lago. One of my favorite examples is Wayne Alan Root, who was a political conspiracy theorist. He wrote for kind of fringe publications, and in 2015 or so, no, in earlier than that, about 2012, he wrote a column comparing Donald Trump to Bulworth, which was a character that Warren Beatty played in a movie about a man who runs for president by basically doing everything that you're not supposed to do. It's kind of similar to what Trump's political approach was. Wayne had a dear friend named Lee Lipton, who's a South Florida restaurateur, and Lipton was a Mar-a-Lago member. Through that connection, eventually Wayne becomes part of Trump's inner circle, whether it's visiting Mar-a-Lago or just following him on political rally stops. He now has an 8 p.m. slot on Newsmax TV. He has 80,000 Twitter followers and a national syndicated radio show at 6 p.m. And Trump actually told him a few days before he announced his presidential run that he was going to do it, that he was going to go through with it. I think he's a really good example of someone who used that access, that personal access that is brought by going to Mar-a-Lago for basically just very personal gain, and at the same time kind of supporting Trump's political aspirations. How did you guys come across him?
Well, Wayne Allen Root, like so many people that have capitalized on the Trump brand, published it. He, published an account of his experience there. He talks about Trump all the time. And when you talk to Wayne Allen Root, he'll tell you that his career was built on the coattails of Donald Trump. And he realized early on that the way to make it was to have a show that was all about celebrating Donald Trump. And he did that. And he's not ashamed of it. And so he and other people like that who have really built media brands largely around their access and around celebrating Donald Trump tend to do it in similar ways. They do it by publishing their experiences, publishing, the great things he's done. Another example of that are the Trumpettes, which are, started as basically 4 Mar-a-Lago members or one member and her friends, in Palm Beach, sitting around and saying, how, should we orient around Donald Trump's campaign in 2015? And they decide, these are 70-ish year old women from Palm Beach, socialites, and they decide to just have parties celebrating Donald Trump. And the Trumpettes USA ends up being, an organization with hundreds of members across the globe. Donald Trump visited their annual event at Mar-a-Lago and celebrated their success and celebrated them. And effectively, they don't raise money, they don't campaign, they don't do any of those things. They just celebrate Trump. And in this way, Tony Holt Kramer, the founder of the Trumpettes, Wayne Allen Root, who, as you said, has the show on Newsmax, they've all sort of found a way to capitalize on that red hot Trump brand. And they've done it through Mar-a-Lago.
And then there are some people who had nobler intentions or more serious intentions who were not able to do anything. Annie Marie Delgado is a political Republican GOP activist here in Florida, and she was disturbed by the increasing presence of something that she called rhinos, Republicans in name only. She went through the motions to get into Mar-a-Lago just so she could get next to Trump and kind of whisper in his ear about the situation, this trend that she saw growing throughout the state. But that didn't work out for her at all. Nick, can you talk a little bit about what happened with her?
Yeah, I mean, so she's an interesting person because she's another one of the South Floridians who has known Trump for much longer than anyone in DC. I mean, she helped him sell condos, I think, as far back as the 80s or 90s. He had a nickname for it. He called her Spitfire, I think it was. And so, she was able to navigate Mar-a-Lago and literally whisper in the president's ear. Now, as you said, she's kind of been on the losing side while it's still kind of an ongoing civil war in the Florida Republican party right now. But, people on both sides of this battle are not playing by the standard rules of Washington. This is Palm Beach rules, and it's very different from what the establishment is used to.
You guys opened the book with an anecdote about Mike Tyson just kind of wandering onto the grounds of Mar-a-Lago without anybody stopping him, and you close the book with the anecdote of another person who walked into Mar-a-Lago without anybody stopping him, Eugene Zhang, who, as you know, was accused of possibly espionage for the Chinese. And you also, for the first time, gave us a breakdown of what she was doing the first couple of days before she showed up at Mar-a-Lago. That case was so incredibly bizarre, her demeanor in court. Jay, tell us a little bit about Eugene Chang and why what she did is so frightening and potentially, devastating to the country.
Well, before I do that, I want to make a comment that both Nick and Sarah in particular have brought up earlier, that there is such a randomness about the people who started showing up at Mar-a-Lago once Trump became president. And the reason why it became random is because, the Charlottesville episode was a turning point. You had the old timers, the socialites canceling their galas at Mar-a-Lago, and it sort of opened the door. I don't want to say it was like a convention center atmosphere, but it kind of allowed any kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry charity to open up and hold something there for a price, $500, $1,000, $2,500 a person. So it's what allowed for anybody from a Mike Tyson to show up, who strolled in from the beach, to a Eugene Zhang who came through the front door. And the reason why she became such a flashpoint is because she took the sort of Cindy Yang episode to another level. Cindy Yang was selling tours with another Chinese gentleman named Charles Lee, and they were selling access to Chinese people who became obsessed with Trump and became obsessed with his brand and became obsessed with the idea of being near him. So they would buy these tour packages to come to the United States, and Eugene Zhang bought one of these tour packages. And, I don't want to give away what happened here because people have probably read the stories in the paper, but for new readers, I kind of want to hold back on what Eugene Zhang did. But she came there with every intention of meeting the president, meeting his family, and thinking that this was somehow going to, burnish her resume and enable her to become the entrepreneur that Trump is, and that she too could become very successful. And she came to Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago with a mission. The question is, was she just this, intruder here to, at Mar-a-Lago to gain access to the president? Or was it possibly more sinister? Was she possibly an agent or an access agent of the Chinese government that had been under suspicion for infiltrating South Florida and also Mar-a-Lago and obviously the president of the United States? And so this all became sort of the backdrop to Eugene Zhang's sudden appearance on a late March afternoon in this gray evening gown. And, I would kind of like to leave the other parts out, but she is a story in herself that still isn't completely told.
Yeah, it's excuse me, it's pretty outrageous and insane, and it kind of serves like the perfect capper for a book that's full of stories. And you're right, the randomness of the people who start showing up there can't be overstated. The last chapter in the book talks about the end of Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was shut down because of the COVID virus, and to me it's a little bit symbolic of what has happened to Trump's presidency, where it has been rocked by the pandemic, and he's still fighting to right the ship. Mar-a-Lago, I think, is a metaphor, for something. It might have been like an end of an era for that kind of accessibility to a president. Any closing thoughts you guys have about the book? I know I've left out a lot of the humorous stuff in it. but I kind of feel like readers should discover those things for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. No matter how much they didn't want it to happen, no matter how hard Mar-a-Lago tried to stay open as this pandemic sort of blew into the United States and into Florida in March, it just didn't matter what the desire was or what the intention was. At the end of the day, you know, on around March 20th or 21st, Mar-a-Lago shut down, and it shut down just like all of the other hospitality businesses in Florida. And it hasn't reopened in a meaningful way, and it won't reopen until after the election. Mar-a-Lago season is only Thanksgiving to Mother's Day. And so because it's been shut through Mother's Day, it won't reopen again until the end of November. And so what it will be in the future, you know, what might happen next at the club is anyone's guess. But for now and through November, it's closed.
All right, guys, listen, it's been a pleasure. Sarah Blasky, Nick Nehamas, Jay Weaver, and Caitlin Ostrop, who, by the way, is with us. She's watching online. So, hey Caitlin, we miss you.
Hey,
Caitlin. You guys, it's called the Grifters Club, and I used to be a movie critic, and I used to review movies that were made by my friends, and I would still pan them. So I would tell you this was a bad book, and it's an amazing, really funny, eye-opening, and at times shocking book. So check it out. You guys, great job. I'm proud to be your colleague. And if you're out there still watching, thanks for hanging out with us. And the book is available today, bookstores and online everywhere. Thanks, guys.